I'm Michael Salla. I was a former professor at American University in Washington, D.C. In 2001, I got very interested in this whole question of government cover-up of extraterrestrial life. And I have ever since been doing research on that. And this current research that you're about to watch on this video is featuring what I've discovered has been occurring in Antarctica, deep under the ice, that there has been a flourishing set of programs involving Germans that were able to escape to Antarctica just before the end of the Second World War, and US corporations that have been working with the Germans in developing advanced technologies for use in a secret space program that has been used for colonizing other planets, for being able to establish bases throughout the solar system. I'm very grateful to the organisers of the Empowered Light Holistic Expo for inviting me to be able to introduce this information to their audience, and I hope it helps them awaken to the truth of what's been happening in Antarctica and elsewhere around the world.
I want to thank everybody for coming to the Empowered Light Holistic Expo. Yay! And I am so grateful for your attendance. Thank you for coming to see Dr. Michael Salla. It is an honor to have you here. And I'm sure that most of us in this room have watched your videos, read your books, or at least know who you are. Who doesn't know who For real?
Okay, wow.
No? Okay. Dr. Michael Salla has been studying politics and what's going on in our Earth globally. And he's going to speak about what's happening in Antarctica specifically today, but you're going to get a big overview of exactly what's happening behind the scenes that most of us haven't been taught in school. When I saw these young men here today, I'm just so grateful because we've all been taught disinformation and misinformation our whole lives. We've been programmed, and I'm so grateful that we're breaking through. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me, Sue. Well, thanks, Sue, for inviting me. Really pleased to be here. I want to tell you about a little bit of insider information I heard. I don't know how reliable this information is that I'm going to share, but I'm going to share it anyway. Basically, when Donald Trump was elected to the presidency, he was given a top secret briefing and told about these secret bases on the moon. And Trump thought, well, fantastic, we're going to build a Trump Tower on the moon. So he gave the orders, all done in secrecy, of course, and the Trump Tower was built in record time there, in kind of that near zero gravity that they have on the moon. But unfortunately, after 6 months, it went out of business. It had no atmosphere. Okay, all right. So I'm going to be talking about secret space programs and how Antarctica is connected to these secret space programs. And, you know, when it comes to information about secret space programs, where do you begin? Because there is just so much out there. And trying to come up with a kind of historical timeline is challenging. But I think the one series of events that really helps us understand the history of Antarctica was this expedition led by the Germans, actually sponsored by Nazi Germany in 1938-39. And so even though this was sponsored by Nazi Germany, it was basically put together by German secret societies, German nationalists, especially the German Navy. And this is one of the things that's really important in terms of understanding what's happening today in Antarctica, is that Germany itself had different factions, just as we have different factions in the United States, and you know, those that loved Donald Trump and those that do not like him very much at all. In Germany, there were different factions as well, and many people saw Adolf Hitler through the prism of their particular agenda. So German nationalists saw him as someone that would promote their agenda. So they actually set him up. One of the secret societies was called the Thule Society, and that is based on the idea that Germans, by their ethnicity, are related to this ancient society called Hyperborea, and that the Hyperboreans, their capital was Ultima Thule. And that was an inner earth civilization that this German secret society believed continued to exist at that time. So psychics came aboard and helped with communication. So this was all kind of a very esoteric movement. The Rural Society was involved in that. So these were the people that were behind this expedition to Antarctica. The Thule Society, the German secret societies, especially the German Navy. They are the ones that were very supportive of German nationalism, because in Germany during the Weimar Republic years, the German Navy was the one institution that could guarantee the unity of Germany as a state. The army, it was driven by different factions because the state of Bavaria wanted to be independent, and so there were different factions. But the German Navy was very much involved in promoting an ideology that would keep Germany united as one. And so this idea that Germans were descendants or connected to this ancient Hyperborean race, and that some of them may continue to exist, and Antarctica was connected to the Hyperboreans, made this a place for them to go to. So the Germans, secret societies, the German nationalists got funding from the Nazi state, and were able to put together an expedition to go down to Antarctica. So that happened in 1938-39, and sure enough, they found ice caverns under the ice. So this is a picture of one of these caverns that could be found under the ice. That's supposedly, I haven't been able to confirm this, that this was actually one of those caves that was found by the German nationalists that were part of that very first expedition. So how did they get down there? Well, this was one of those discoveries. At some point the Germans discovered that there was underground entry points into these caverns under the Antarctic ice. And these entry points could be accessed by submarines. And so this is a diagram of a submarine that was able to find exactly where to go in terms of accessing an entry point into Antarctica. Now, one of the questions people often say is, well, what evidence is there that there were German bases in Antarctica? Well, one of the things that can be kind of cited is that officially there was orders given by President Roosevelt to Admiral Richard Byrd in 1939 to go down to Antarctica and find the German bases in Antarctica. So even back in 1939, the Roosevelt administration knew that the Germans had built bases in Antarctica, and they had instructed Byrd to go down there and find them. So this was something that was known at the time, but of course with the war, everything that was happening down in Antarctica got eclipsed by the kind of momentous nature of the war in Europe that of course eventually spread and involved the United States. So where were these German bases that Roosevelt had ordered Byrd to find back in 1939? They were in this area called Queen Maud Land. And this was a map used by the German military, which was kind of restricted access. Only after the war was it made available. And it showed this Queen Maud Land, or Neuschwabenland, which is what the Germans named it. And you can see it's on the zero longitude that goes right up to England, the zero meridian. So the Western Hemisphere is technically over here, but that's where the US was concerned that the Germans were building bases in the Western Hemisphere. But as you can see, the Western Hemisphere of Antarctica is kind of like on this side here. So it was outside of the US kind of interest, out of the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine dictated that any European power that operated in the Western Hemisphere, that this was something the United States would oppose. Well, because the bases were here in the eastern area of Antarctica, it was basically left alone. But the war kind of eclipsed everything. Now, exactly how far under the ice were the Germans able to penetrate? Well, we can see here from these scientific surveys of the river systems and network of lakes under the Antarctic ice that the Germans, does everyone see that pretty clearly? Good, all right. You could see, you know, the blue access points. I mean, this is the rivers under the Antarctic ice. So yeah, the blue is the rivers, then you've got the lakes, the light blue. So there's a lot of area under the Antarctic ice which has these rivers. And so, they, even though the ice has frozen over the top, underneath the river continues to flow. So this is how the submarines were able to access deep into the interior of Antarctica. Okay, so now we get to the question, well, exactly how far and how could this all be done? Well, here you have a comparison of what Antarctica looks with the ice on top of it, and by side, how it looks. Another map shows how it looks without ice on it, and you can see the network. You can see the kind of the blue areas like rivers. The light blue is kind of like under sea level, which might be lakes. And the red arrow shows that the Germans kind of entered up here, up around the 0 meridian or longitude, and kind of followed a path into the interior. There actually were instructions given to U-boat captains on how to do this. So here you have the instructions, a set of instructions that was leaked, showing how the German submarine captains could actually find where to go as they approached Antarctica, and how deep they had to go, and how they had to kind of like surface or rise up in terms of their depth. So here you have like a contour of what it's like under the Antarctic as you travel. So, you know, under the coast you have the kind of shelf here, the continental shelf, or where the ice extends out, and they had to go underneath it, and it gives you kind of information of how much to submerge and so forth. So these are the instructions. They've been translated. So this map, it's all in German, of course, and this is the instructions. So, and probably the one that most interests us at this point is that this is the instructions given to the U-boat commander. It says, you know, descend at the point with the coordinates, the exact intersection of 64 southern latitude and 1 degree eastern longitude to a depth of 400 meters. So basically, just as they approach the Antarctic Circle, which is at 65 degrees south latitude, they got to go down to 400 meters, and then they follow the instructions, and it tells them how to get under the ice. So this is the instructions that were issued to the German captains. So this is the kind of history of a little bit of an idea of how the Germans were able to establish a base down there in Antarctica. Now, according to a number of whistleblowers, Corey Good, William Tompkins, the Germans were able to establish production facilities down in Antarctica for successful flying saucer prototypes. So it's well known that in occupied Europe, the Germans were working on flying saucers. There's been a lot of kind of documents, FBI documents, CIA documents, newspaper reports, experts, engineers who had worked with Germany or with Italy that talked about their efforts to reverse engineer, or their efforts to build operational flying saucers for the war effort. So this is real history. The Germans did try to build flying saucers with weapon systems that they could deploy in the war. So that's historical fact. What's not known is how much of this was actually successfully developed and moved out of Germany before the end of the war. According to William Tompkins, the Germans were working on 30 different prototypes, all different types of flying saucers. And here you have diagrams of some of them, like there's the Vril craft that date to the 1920s, the Haunebu series of flying saucer craft. That these were efforts by the Germans to see which technology, which prototypes would be most successful. And the ones that were successful before the end of the war were taken down to Antarctica. The ones that were unsuccessful or still in the testing phase, they were kind of left behind. And so that's what the Americans and the Russians found. And so they found these kind of untested prototypes. And so that's what they brought back to the United States under Operation Paperclip. So Tompkins, Corey Good, Clark McClelland is another whistleblower who's talked about this. So they discussed this. Another whistleblower who's not well known his name's Vladimir Trzynski. Who's heard of Vladimir Trzynski? Just raise your hand. Okay, a few of you. Well, he's not known now because in 1991 he began talking about the kind of stuff you're hearing now, that the kind of things that Corey Good and William Tompkins talked about. Back in 1991, Vladimir Trzynski began talking about this. And where did Trzynski get the information? Well, he got the information from Nazi SS files that had been released with the result with the collapse of the Warsaw Pact. Trzynski was a member of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, so they got all of these Nazi SS files that showed what had been built in Antarctica and what was going on down in Antarctica. So Trzynski got his hands on these files with photos, which showed the prototypes that had been successfully developed. So a lot of really detailed information. So he began talking about this in 1991, began giving lectures kind of similar to this. And I don't know, Pat, if you go back that far, 1991, if you're giving conferences, but he gave a few conferences. Did you ever see him?
He spoke at my conference in Trenton, New Jersey.
Perfect, okay. I actually started off in 2003 at one of Pat Mercantilio's UFO conferences, so great to know. I can talk to you more about Trzynski later. But in 1994, he just disappeared. Just no one could find out where he was, and I think the reason is pretty clear, that he was actually talking too much. So this is one of the photos that Trzynski released that showed the German Space Command under the Antarctic ice. So this is one of the Nazi SS files, and this was actually a base that the German Navy had set up using funds provided by Nazi Germany, by Hitler's Third Reich, and they were developing spacecraft to go to the moon, to go to Mars, all under the Antarctic ice. Here is one of the other documents that Trzynski released that showed the different types of flying saucer prototypes that had been developed. Here you have like the Vril, sorry, here you have the Haunebu 1, and this says that there were 2 models that were developed. They were tested, 52 times, and they were, and this tells you where they were assembled, or the drive, the propulsion system that it had, and this had a tachyon drive. So this was a drive that was being pioneered by the Germans back in the 1930s and 40s. So this was a tachyon drive. Hannibal 2, you had 7 of them built, 106 test flights, same sort of propulsion system. The Hannibal 3, this was the one that they sent to Mars. The Hannibal 3, it could actually achieve a velocity of 40,000 kilometers per hour, which is basically how you leave the Earth's orbit. And so what was it, 19 test flights of these things. And here you had the Vril 1. These were the very first flying saucers. They were developed in the 1920s, or their propulsion systems dates back in the 1920s. The first one, as far as I know, was successfully tested in early 1930s, probably 1933. So this is one of the files that Tuszynski released. Here he had another file that showed you that the manufacturer of this Hannibal 2 crafts, this is the flying saucer, that this was actually built by Dornier Aircraft. So these files actually tell you which German companies were building these craft, right? So, you know.
You're saying that the Germans built these, they're not like they were stored there from UFO from other planets?
No, these were built by Germany. As I mentioned earlier, the Germans had built 30 prototypes. You know, they had found flying saucers, they had been given flying saucers, but they were building these for the war effort. So it's not as though they could, refurbish crashed flying saucers for the war effort. They had to study them and basically build them from scratch using German science and manufacturing techniques. And the Germans, just as the United States, the military doesn't actually build things. At most, they will put together science laboratories to understand the principles behind the propulsion systems. But then they will get American companies to build them. So, for example, like the F-35, which is now just coming into production. That's built by Lockheed Martin, but the engines might be built by Rolls-Royce, and so you have different contractors building different components, but you have one main contractor or company assembling it all together, which would be Lockheed Martin. So you have the navigation, propulsion, the weapons systems, the electronic jamming system. So different companies would do that in the United States. So a craft like now the F-35, the F-22, all of these have different US corporate contractors building all of the components. So Germany was the same. And the Germans were able to get all of these companies to build the crafts. So for example, companies like Messerschmitt, Focke-Wulf, Dornier, they would build the kind of the superstructure, like the outside of the craft. Volkswagen, Daimler-Benz. So all of these would build prototypes based on whatever specifications they had been given by the German military for a craft. Siemens and AEG built the propulsion systems. So they were the ones that were behind the tachyon drives or the kind of electrogravitic drives. So these were major companies in Germany at the time. Siemens continues to exist today. Zeppelin, the Zeppelin Corporation, Goodyear was a partner with Zeppelin, and they built the big cigar-shaped craft. Some of the craft began to be seen in the early 1950s. So these were craft that were built using the Zeppelin designs. Now, one of the interesting things I just found out was that the person that actually helped design some of these Zeppelin craft, especially the USS Macon and the USS Akon, which were built in early 1930s in the United States, was the same guy that was actually William Tompkins' boss at Douglas Aircraft Company in the 1950s. Wolfgang Klemperer is his name. So Wolfgang Klemperer was the guy that helped build the Zeppelin craft in Germany in the 1920s and earlier.
Did they build the dirigibles?
Yes, they built, no, Zeppelin, Goodyear built the dirigibles, the USS Macon and Akron, which were used by the Navy as flying aircraft carriers. So this is fact, that the Navy back in the 1930s had flying aircraft carriers. But they only lasted for a few years because helium was a very unstable kind of system for and allowing them to fly or to float. A.G. Farben, they built the weapon systems. Rochling built the special metal alloys, as did Krupp. Now the thing is, this gives you an idea of the kind of different German corporations that were involved in building these craft. But many of these companies actually partnered with the United States companies in the 1920s and 30s. So US companies partnered with these in the lead up to the Second World War in building some of the components that eventually would be assembled together. So US corporations from the beginning became very kind of aware of this. Which kind of helps explain how William Tompkins said that these Navy spies were able to get into Germany because American companies that had partnered with German companies provided an ideal way of infiltrating Germany. Okay, so August 23, 1942, you have Werner Theisenberg, the first successful moon landing. This was Vladimir Trzynski's information.
That just looks like the Americans.
Well, yeah, of course, this is just a shot. It's been photoshopped, but it gives you this photo itself doesn't come from Trzynski. It's just something that's been photoshopped, but it just kind of shows you, illustrates that the Germans were the first to get to the moon. According to Trzynski, they did the same thing with Mars, first to get to Mars. This happened in 1945, so that's kind of very difficult for a lot of people that maybe haven't been introduced to this kind of information, that back in the 1940s there could have been successful moon landings and successful Mars landings, because even today, as we know, no man officially has landed on the moon, on Mars. So this is something that Trzynski, Corey Good, William Tompkins have talked about the successful Mars missions that occurred out of Antarctica. So this was happening in the 40s. Now, how did the Germans fund all of this? I mean, if this was really happening and they got this huge program happening in Antarctica under the ice, during the Second World War, and then after it, as Germany begins to kind of lose the war, how did they get things down to Antarctica and fund it all? So funding, how did you fund it? Well, there was actually a document, an army intelligence document, that actually showed how the German industrialists were instructed in 1944 to get as much money out of Nazi Germany as possible. After the Normandy landings, the deputy Führer, Martin Bormann, realized that the war was lost. So they, from that moment on, from August, it was very clear. It was clearer even back in 1943 with the Russian front. But by 1944, the Americans and the British have landed in Normandy. Now they're coming across from the west. So the war's lost. So they're now telling all the German companies, get all your capital out. Move as much equipment and resources out as you can, because the Third Reich is going to collapse, but there is a plan for a Fourth Reich, which will be an attempt to establish Germany's global dominance through economic means. So it was going to be an attempt to use as much capital as they had acquired through conquest and theft and so forth, to use that to kind of fund this renaissance or this new German program, which would be based out of Antarctica, but there would be a kind of financial worldwide empire using friendly countries like in South America, places like Switzerland, Sweden, that had been kind of sympathetic towards the Germans. So Jim Mars's book, The Rise of the Fourth Reich, is a really good one if you wanted to kind of read up the history on how this happened, how the Fourth Reich actually does exist, but it's a kind of a covert empire built using all of these illicit funds that the Third Reich had acquired and then siphoned out of Germany before the collapse of the Hitler's regime, and then they would use that for funding the German space program in Antarctica and their efforts around the planet. So now we're getting into the war's over. Now it's a time for the US to kind of deal with what's happening in Antarctica. As I mentioned earlier, in '39, Byrd had been instructed to go down to Antarctica, find the bases. He did go down there. There were several ships, I think it was 3 that Byrd led down there. They couldn't find the bases. Then the war happened. And then right up until 1945, Antarctica is kind of like off the map. All the US resources are poured into the war effort. Then in 1945-46, that's the Antarctic summer. We experienced summer down there, reversed to you here in the Northern Hemisphere. So this is the summer for us in the Southern Hemisphere. And so Byrd was given secret instructions to go down to Antarctica again and to find the Germans and to negotiate with them. Because the US authorities thought that, well, the Germans would be willing to negotiate because we negotiated with Kammler and those guys from the Third Reich and reached deals with them, so many of them could escape, and Bormann could escape, and Hitler could escape to South America. So that they thought that they would be able to negotiate with them. Well, the difference was that the Germans in Antarctica weren't necessarily Nazis, they were nationalists. They were German nationalists, not Nazis. So they found that the German nationalists in Antarctica, they kind of weren't as interested in a deal. So Byrd went down there, tried to make a deal, nothing happened. Now we know this actually happened because of Graham Bethune, who was a Navy commander, and he actually piloted the craft that took Admiral Byrd down to Antarctica. And he told, and this was relayed through Donald Ware, who was a lieutenant colonel for the US Air Force. And so Donald Ware actually said, quote, "Graham Bethune was a friend of mine. He was the pilot who flew Admiral Byrd to Antarctica in 1945. Byrd was sent down there to find out what was going on. He was sent home early, but I think Byrd was able to negotiate US scientists joining the German scientists in their underground base working on advanced technology." So a deal hadn't been reached, a major deal, but yet the Germans were open to having US scientists go down there and introduce them to some of their technologies, because the Germans were looking for some kind of long-term agreement, but yet an agreement hadn't been reached at that point. So the US Navy thought that, well, since we weren't able to reach an agreement with these guys, we'll go down there and we'll send an armada. And so there were approximately 4,700 sailors, Marines and so forth. They told the public that it was a scientific mission. So this was a scientific mission with about 4,700 sailors and Marines and no scientists. Really? But the public bought it because that's what the newspapers said. It's like, okay, the newspaper said it, that's what it is. So on this scientific mission, there was an encounter that happened, and I'll mention that. But firstly, one of the things that did occur apparently was a meeting between Admiral Byrd and some of the inner Earth people that actually were working with the Germans down there in Antarctica. So Admiral Byrd's encounter was with the Ariani. So this was the kind of inner Earth group that the Germans believed that they had established communication or contact with through these esoteric societies like the Vril Society, the Thule Society. They made contact with the Ariani, and apparently Byrd, according to the Admiral Byrd's diaries, actually had an encounter with the Ariani during Operation Highjump in 1947. So that's the secret diaries of Admiral Byrd, which are still pretty controversial, but still I think they give us an idea of what Byrd could have encountered. Sometimes the truth is leaked in a controversial way. So these diaries might be an example of that. So anyway, so according to Admiral Byrd's diaries, he meets with this master from the inner earth, and he tells Byrd, you are in the domain of the Ariani, the inner world of the earth. We shall not long delay your mission, and you will be safely escorted back to the surface and for a distance beyond. But now, Admiral, I shall tell you why you have been summoned here. Our interest rightly begins just after your race exploded the first atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. It was at that alarming time we sent our flying machines, the Fuglerrads, to your surface world to investigate what your race had done. End quote. So, Fuglerrads, kind of flying ships in German. So these were kind of German-speaking people. And Byrd apparently was given this kind of message to relay down to Washington, D.C. and to President Truman and to the Pentagon. Now, the Germans were being helped by this race. So, Corey Goode, he says that he had access to briefing documents that were available on these smart glass pads, kind of like an iPad, but fully transparent. That Corey Goode says that he had access to these, and that he read all about these events that had occurred down in Antarctica. With the meetings between the Germans and the Inner Earth people and Admiral Byrd's expedition, and that according to Corey Goode, and this was the information on these smart glass pads, that information was actually provided like 40 years earlier by William Tompkins. So this is why William Tompkins' information is so significant, because it really does support what Corey Goode was saying more recently. So according to Goode, quote, there was help from a group that the Nazis were led to believe were ETs, referred to as Ariani or Aryans, sometimes called Nordics, but were actually an ancient Earth human breakaway civilization that had developed a space program referred to as the Silver Fleet, and created vast bases below the Himalayan mountains, largest in Tibet, and called the System, Agartha, and a few other regions. So, this is the information Corey Goode has given us about what was actually being developed, what had been, what kind of a civilizational breakaway group existed down there in Antarctica.
Are there photographs of these groups?
No, these are just people who say that they saw documents.
If they had cameras back then, don't they have any proof, evidence?
That's proof evidence is of classified programs is always very hard to have because it's illegal. Any whistleblower that has classified information about any of this stuff and releases it to the public can be arrested and detained. So,
Nobody's not going to help.
but as I mentioned earlier, there were these Nazi SS files documents that were released that showed some of this stuff. So there are documents, but they're hard to come by. But maybe we can come back to that later during this question and answer. There was this competition, if you like, between different factions of the inner earth beings. One group called themselves the Garthans, another group called themselves from Shambhala. And these, one group were helping the Germans, that were the Ariani, and the other group were actually opposed to the Ariane, and this is according to the inner Earth. According to Corey Good, this group, the Shambhala inner Earth beings, were opposed or regarded by the Ariane and their German allies as opponents. So this is just kind of a little bit of information about the factions that exist in the inner Earth, and that is relevant to Antarctica. So the Ariane are operating in Antarctica, and that they are connected with the Agathans. So Corey Good put together some illustrations of this, of how these different groups looked. So here you have these groups wearing pendants, and these pendants had certain properties, inherent properties. They were kind of technological. So they were used as a form of technology, kind of like teleportation, telekinesis, that sort of thing, to aid these inner Earth beings. One of the groups that Corey Good says he met was this Omega group, and they might well be the inner Earth Ariane that Admiral Byrd met back in 1945. They have a fleet of craft called the Silver Fleet, which has been observed. So it gives you a little bit of a kind of picture of the inner Earth groups and how that relates to Antarctica, Admiral Byrd, and what was going on down there. So in 1947, you have Operation Highjump. That was a disaster. Planes were shot down. According to some of the files that emerged from the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, there were a few Navy sailors that actually talked about what they saw, and they described seeing craft coming out of the ocean, and these craft basically attacked the Navy Armada, the three task forces that made up Operation Highjump. They were attacked by these craft, but even though the flying saucers had superior technology, they just shot down a few of the planes, sank some of the ships, but they weren't interested in eliminating the whole flotilla. They just wanted to kind of send a message, and they wanted to give the US Navy a bloody nose and send a message back to Washington that, we're here, we have more superior technology than you, so let's talk. So after after Operation Highjump, Admiral Byrd went to Chile on his way back up to Washington, D.C. to give his debriefing. And so Admiral Byrd, this was from a newspaper article by Lee Van Atter in March of 1947, and he said, Admiral Byrd warned today of the necessity for the United States to adopt protective measures against the possibility of an invasion of the country by hostile aircraft proceeding from the polar regions. The Admiral said, I do not want to scare anybody, but the bitter reality is that in the event of a new war, the United States will be attacked by aircraft flying in from over one or both poles. End quote. Well, I mean, the Soviet Union, you can understand flying aircraft over the North Pole to attack the United States. Definitely a national security concern back at the time, but the South Pole? Well, as far as I know, the Emperor Penguin squadrons have been grounded for the last 10,000 years. So it's doesn't belong to the Emperor Penguins. So who do these aircraft belong to that can fly out of the South Pole and begin attacking the United States? Well, I think Byrd was just relaying what he could kind of like just very briefly sketch out was really going on. But I think he was clearly alluding to the German program that was operating out of Antarctica at the time. Kenneth Arnold in 1947, so this is the beginning of the modern UFO era. In June of 1947, the Kenneth Arnold sightings near Mount Rainier, or the Cascade Mountains there in Washington State. He said he saw a squadron of these craft, of these kind of crescent-shaped craft flying over the Cascade Mountains. and described them, and he wasn't the only one that saw them. And he said they could kind of, their motion was like a saucer flying over skipping across the ocean. So that's where the flying saucer term came along. But they didn't actually look like flying saucers. They looked more like what today we would say is a flying wing. And the first flying wings were developed in Germany, Nazi Germany. And so that's the Horten flying wing. This was brought over to the United States under Operation Paperclip. But the important thing here was that this was the model, one of the unsuccessful models. The successful versions were shipped down to Antarctica, and this is what began to be sighted in 1947. So the Germans, after Operation Highjump, only a few months after that, begin overflights of the United States. So they're sending a message saying that, okay, you sent your Navy Armada down here to take us out. We defeated them pretty easily, and now we are able to fly over US territory with impunity. They're sending a message. And then around the same time, you have the German V2 rockets that had been brought into the United States that were being tested. These things start getting shot down by flying saucers, or start getting disrupted by flying saucers. So the German program out of Antarctica, after they basically had beaten the US Navy, gave them a bloody nose. Now they were overflying US territory and giving the US Army, US Army Air Force, a bloody nose by shooting down their missiles. And the Army Air Force couldn't do anything about it. So this is in May of 1947. So at that point, the US Air Force was still formally part of the US Army, and the US Army was in control of these rocket tests. So the German flying saucers were shooting them down. One of the things that isn't kind of discussed much at all is how many craft were being shot down during this era. So here's Timothy Good said just in a 2-month period, 60 Army and Navy aircraft were lost just over a 2-month period. 120 airmen were killed and 70 others injured in these incidents. So this was all covered up. Basically, the Germans out of Antarctica were flying over the US, just as Byrd had warned. They were shooting down Air Force and Army rockets that were being tested for the future kind of ballistic missile program. And fighter craft that were sent up to intercept the flying saucers were being shot down. This was all covered up. So there were hundreds of these events that had happened. The US Air Force investigates all of this, but the real truth was being hidden, that these flying saucers were connected with the German program out of Antarctica. So Operation Blue Book was, I think many people acknowledge that it was really a sham investigation. They weren't really interested at all in getting to the root of the UFO problem. But many UFO researchers simply assumed that the truth was extraterrestrial. Well, here now we're getting another version that the truth wasn't necessarily extraterrestrial, even though we know extraterrestrials are real. The truth was that some of these flying saucers were German craft operating out of Antarctica. And this was something that they desperately wanted to cover up. Of course, we have the famous 1952 Washington flyover. Again, many researchers assumed that this was extraterrestrial craft. I certainly did when I first heard about it. But with the information that Corey Good, William Tompkins, Clark McClelland, and Tazinski have released, now I believe that at least some of them, if not the majority of these craft flying over Washington, D.C. were actually German flying saucers operating out of Antarctica. They were sending a message, and the message was very clear. You know, we can shoot down your rockets, we can shoot down your aircraft that are attacking us, we can fly over your capital city. We don't want to have a war with you, so let's talk. I think the message is very clear. Truman's first reaction was to shoot down the craft flying over Washington, D.C., but he was advised that that's not a good idea. We've tried that and it hasn't worked. So he revoked those orders, but they were given. This was actually newspapers of the day covered the story that orders had been given that pilots were to shoot down the flying saucers. So it was all covered up, and eventually deals were reached. And in this book, I talk about some of the agreements that were reached between the Eisenhower administration and the extraterrestrial civilizations. Now, this was before I came across the secret space program. Information from Good and Tompkins and others. Now, I think that these agreements actually involved the Germans. So it wasn't just Eisenhower reaching agreements with just extraterrestrials. The Germans were working with extraterrestrials themselves. So they actually reached agreements with a German extraterrestrial alliance. That's what happened. So that book covers it. I only have a few copies left. I think I have one left, but you can get it online if you're interested in that. Colonel Corso, he says that, quote, "We had negotiated a kind of surrender with them, this extraterrestrial German alliance. As long as we couldn't fight them, they dictated terms because they knew what we feared most was disclosure," end quote. So essentially, deals were made and agreements led to the US military-industrial complex working with the Germans to create this. So there was an actual kind of Fourth Reich presence in the United States that began in the 1950s. So the Fourth Reich establishes a foothold in the United States through these agreements in the 1950s. More photos or evidence that there really was an alliance between the Germans and the extraterrestrials comes from this set of photos. That bottom one is an actual photo taken by George Adamski. What was that? December of, I believe that was 1952. That shows you what he believed that was a Venusian scoutcraft. He met with Orthon and he said, well, these are Venusians and that they have these scoutcraft, and these scoutcraft came from these kind of cigar-shaped ships that kind of like are found in the upper atmosphere. Well, when you look at the design of the craft that Adamski had photographed, so this is a genuine photograph. So this is kind of evidence that this kind of stuff was going on. You look, you have three kind of what look like landing gear, but actually can be used for different purposes, and some kind of central hemisphere that's part of some kind of stabilization, inertial stabilizing system. Then you have portholes, kind of like three portholes, and you can see the design of this. Well, you compare that to the Hannibal II craft that Tuzinski was able to find on in the Nazi SS files, and you see the similarity. So even though Adamski says that he was in touch with Venusians who had these advanced flying saucers or scoutcraft, in fact, when we compare them, there's reason to believe that he actually had made contact with the Germans who were pretending to be from Venus. So, that's a possibility. I know a few Adamski researchers are very unhappy with that kind of conclusion, but still, I think it's something to be looked at. There's something there. Well, this is a very interesting case that happened in Hawaii. I live here on the Big Island, and here I am. You can catch me on a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday surfing over there on the west coast of Kona. But this happened in 1956. A flying saucer landed on Oahu, which is where Honolulu is. That's the capital there. And the flying saucer landed, and this was actually an Army sergeant major who was actually working for Army intelligence and whose job was to track reports of flying saucers. So he actually saw this craft land. He was with a number of other Army personnel and saw this craft land, and basically described people coming out in German uniforms wearing kind of Iron Cross and Nazi insignia. This was in 1956. So that tells us that agreements had been reached before then. That's when after the agreements had been reached, so then the German flying saucers out of Antarctica, they could kind of take R&R in Hawaii and maybe catch some waves there on, up on the North Shore, right? Where do you work? Oh, I work in Antarctica. Mars is tough, so I love Oahu. Yeah, it was, I can't remember the name of the base, but just kind of like the outer suburbs of Honolulu.
Barbers Point.
That sounds right.
Barbers Point, which is right where the air is pointing to.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, that was kind of in the interior, but it was an army base then. I can't remember his name, but I can look it up for you. It's in the Antarctica book. I have a book out there, Antarctica's Hidden History. So this incident is described in there in some detail. So the Fourth Reich's Dark Fleet is built in Antarctica. So everything now, the agreements have been set up. Now the US military-industrial complex are officially partners with the Germans, and both sides are looking forward to it, because the German corporations that were building things down there in Antarctica, they lacked manpower, they lacked resources, they were really struggling to kind of meet the demands of this kind of fledgling German space program out of Antarctica. So they were looking forward to the infusion of the US military-industrial complex, and the US military-industrial complex was looking forward to it because finally they were going to get to learn about the secret propulsion systems and the navigation systems and the weapon systems of these flying saucer craft that the Germans corporations had built in Antarctica. So there was a coming together, and so you had the US military-industrial complex being infiltrated by the Germans, by senior German engineers and scientists. Now, Operation Paperclip was a means, even though many people assume that Operation Paperclip was merely the Germans' scientists being brought over to help the US kind of develop a space program with the rockets, or secretly build flying saucer craft out of classified facilities like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Actually, it was a two-edged sword, because it was a way for the Germans in Antarctica to have their people, or to have kind of fervent Nazis or German nationalists infiltrate the US military-industrial complex and report back to the Germans in Antarctica on how advanced the Americans were becoming, and if the Americans were making breakthroughs, to sabotage it. So it was really the Germans in Antarctica didn't want the US to develop a space program at all, even though they said part of the agreements will give you the know-how on how to build these kinds of things, but they had no intent on ever following through on that. The intention was to sabotage, and that's something I talk about in the book, and we can maybe come back to it when I do get to questions. Corey Good says that in 2016 he was taken on a tour of Antarctica, and he got to see 6 of the bases where the German US corporations were building their space platforms, or their spacecraft, the industrial facilities. Corey calls it the interplanetary corporate conglomerate, but the interplanetary corporate conglomerate has essentially been a fusion of German corporations with major US aerospace corporations, along with other countries like Britain, France, Canada, Australia, and so forth, that these corporations came together because ultimately the industrialists that owned these corporations had more in common with one another than they did with the governments or the citizens of those countries. So a German corporation owned by a German industrialist, that German industrialist would have more in common with, say, someone like Henry Ford, who had very similar kind of beliefs, who was in charge of a major US corporation. And so this was the means by which you had a kind of a transnational corporate entity evolving, which was infused with this kind of Fourth Reich philosophy. So that's what we learned from people like Corey Good telling us about what was really happening down in Antarctica. Lake Vostok, that's one of the places where there has been rumors of a civilization that was discovered down there. That Antarctica is not just a place where you actually have German bases that have been expanded with the help of American corporations. Antarctica is a vast place. I mean, it's, 1.6 times the US, the entire US, including Alaska. Antarctica is 1.6 times bigger. So it's vast. So you can have Germans down there with their major bases and working with industrials, but you also have places such as here, Lake Vostok, which can have the ruins or the remains of some ancient civilization. And so here you have this magnetic anomaly discovered in Lake Vostok in 1991, which people began to suspect back then was actually one of these underground buried cities that was down there in Antarctica, hidden under all of those miles of ice. So Lake Vostok, this was right next to the Vostok station, which was a Russian or Soviet Union base built in Antarctica. And it was right where the South Pole, the magnetic South Pole was, but the magnetic South Pole moves. So that's a radar image of the map, and right there in one corner is where you have, at Lake Vostok, kind of like a mile under the ice, you've got this, what appears to be a major city. Now one of the first people to talk about this was Richard Hoagland and Mike Barra back in 1991, where they began to say, well, there's an ancient city down there under the ice. This is what the magnetic anomaly is all about. So this is what Hoagland and Barra said, an ancient city under the ice. Such a discovery would be absolutely dazzling, sending shockwaves through our world as profound as the discovery of artifacts on Mars or ruins on the moon. And the notion is not as improbable as you may think. An anomaly like this could be caused by an accumulation of metals, the kind you would get if you found from the ruins of an ancient buried city. So Hoagland and Barra and others recognised that this magnetic anomaly found at one end of Lake Vostok, buried under 1 mile of ice, that was very likely an ancient city. So in 2002, the Raytheon Corporation gets the contract to go down there and explore. They get the Antarctic support contract, which means that the National Science Foundation, which is the rubric for all of these science missions in Antarctica to study the mating habits of the penguins, to kind of like see how quickly the ice sheets are melting. All of these projects that are approved by the National Science Foundation, typically they have a major aerospace company being the kind of overall contract supervisor. And the reason they choose these major aerospace companies like Raytheon and before them IT&T is because these corporations know how to keep secrets. They are very familiar with how to set up a special access program where you have the special access program doing all sorts of exotic research and development being hidden under a less classified program or a cover program. So Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, they all know how to do this. So this is why these companies are awarded the contracts in Antarctica, because on the one hand, you have the contracts that are awarded are doing kind of very mundane science projects, but on the other hand, you have projects that are doing kind of research in places like this, finding out what's going on down here, doing research at these secret facilities under Antarctica where they're kind of like building components for future generations of spacecraft. Okay, so here Hoagland and Barra began to talk about what Raytheon discovered near Lake Vostok. So what was it? And when they sent their covert teams down there to Lake Vostok, what did they discover? So what they said was some special project has indeed drilled through the ice into the Lake Vostok ecosystem, clandestinely of course, and the participants have suddenly found themselves exposed to something for which their bodies literally have no immunity. 12 McMurdo personnel are supposedly in need of a dangerous emergency medical evacuation well into the Antarctic winter system. All employees of Raytheon Corporation, a high-tech firm that is deeply involved in a variety of black ops programs for the US government all around the world. So what Hoagland and Barra had found out was that the Raytheon scientists, or the Raytheon Corporation, had sent a covert team of scientists and contractors down there to find out what was buried under Vostok. All of these guys got very sick very quickly, and they needed to be evacuated. So how do you what's the best way of hiding a secret? Anyone? Hide the secret in plain sight. And the way to do that is to have the truth be released through an illegitimate source. So if you've discovered a city under the ice, and you're doing research there, the best way to hide the truth of that is to actually have some fictional entity or a disreputable source talk about it publicly. So here's what happened. The rumors of an Antarctic city began to emerge in 2002. There was a company that put out a story saying spectacular ruins captured on video, and that the company that filmed this, that they called themselves Atlantis TV, and that their film crew had been detained by by a special Navy team, or SEALs team, that their film crew had been detained, that they were being held, and that the film was confiscated. So this came out in 2002, and a lot of people began to question, well, is this real? Is it possible that this could have happened? Well, it turns out that this story is actually promotional material for a new book that came out, I think it was 2004 or shortly after, basically promoting this kind of fictional story of an ancient civilization being discovered under the ice, and that there was a race between major nations on the earth. So this was what was put out to try and distract the public from the truth, that something really had been discovered down there. Corey Good that says that he was taken down there in 2016, and that this is when, I'll get to his 2016 trip shortly, but Corey Good, before he went down there in 2016, says that he got briefings that there was the discovery of a pre-Adamite civilization in 2002. The excavations began. So Corey Good, he has some insider sources telling him what's going on within the world of covert operations, black operations. And so he was told that they had found these ancient ruins in Antarctica, and that in 2002 a lot of scientists and archaeologists were being allowed to go there and to do research and to begin filming and to put together scientific papers, so that eventually this would be revealed to the world in a manner that would shock the scientific community. But that this all began in 2002. So this is consistent with what I've been talking about earlier, the discovery of this ancient city down there. So in early 2016, early 2017, Corey Good is taken to Antarctica. This is his second trip down there. So he's one of only two people that has been to Antarctica under the ice and seen what is really going on with these covert programs. The other person is Pete Peterson. So both of them have appeared on Cosmic Disclosure and say that they have been there. They were taken down there and they saw ruins and that they worked on these covert programs. So Corey says he was taken down there in January 2017 and he saw these ancient ruins. And you probably have seen this on Cosmic Disclosure. Anyone not seen this photo or on Cosmic Disclosure? Or this sort of picture, this drawing illustration? Okay, so you've all seen it. So yeah, it just shows Corey Good's depiction of the excavations happening under the ice, and they find some of the artifacts dating from this pre-Adamite civilization. And that's the craft Corey was brought in January of 2017. Here you have some of the bodies that were found with this. Yeah, that's an illustration, not a photograph. Yeah, this is just even though he says photographs were being taken, there was someone down there taking photographs. He says that he was not allowed to distribute those photographs, that these eventually will be released, but it's when the decision is made to kind of like reveal this to the general public. So for now, we're being given a kind of form of soft disclosure, which is people saying, we've been down there, we've seen this, this really happened, they are very sincere, they have no reason to fabricate any of this. But of course, everyone can say, well, there's no hard evidence, so why should I believe you? And that's fine, because that's how soft disclosure works. Hard disclosure or real disclosure or full disclosure is going to be when the evidence is released. And while we all want it, we don't control that. But soft disclosure is happening. So then in 2011, Lockheed Martin gets the contract to oversee what's going on in Antarctica. And so what's interesting about this was that Lockheed Martin in 2011, they are the world's largest defence contractor. And so why would they be interested in the mating habits of penguins? Right? And how quickly the ice sheet is melting. I don't think they're very interested. They're a defence contractor. They're there to, yeah, sure, fund the projects, looking at what the penguins are doing in those dark corners. But they're also there to run these covert programs under these cover programs. And so these covert programs involve excavating these ancient cities and finding whether any of these kind of ancient technologies have any kind of weapons application. Then the Antarctic support contract is then given to Leidos in 2015. Now Leidos, this is where it gets a little complicated, but Leidos is a spin-off of Strategic Applications International Corporation in 2013. So, trying to find out what American corporations are doing what in Antarctica is challenging, because often you have corporations kind of splitting off, creating offshoots to run programs to kind of maintain secrecy. So Leidos is a shoot-off of SAIC, and that runs these secret programs down there in Antarctica, and they were given that contract by Lockheed Martin because Lockheed Martin was having trouble. Just as Raytheon was having trouble with these technologies that they were discovering under the ice sheets, Lockheed Martin was having trouble, so they wanted help, so they got Leidos involved, and Leidos, with the connections to SAIC, have more expertise, and so they're basically trying to understand exactly what's being buried under Antarctica and how quickly all of this is going to be revealed to the public because the ice sheets are melting. So as the ice sheets are melting, you're having, and this is an article on my website, just exopolitics.org, so you can see these articles where I talk about what different whistleblowers tell us about the ice sheets melting off and how there's a kind of race by different countries to get to Antarctica to find out exactly what's buried under there, and to see whether any of this technology is something that they can reverse engineer. Secret space programs, according to information that Corey Good has, that in early 2016 there was a battle in Antarctica. And so in this battle in Antarctica, the Interplanetary Corporate Conglomerate, which is this fusion of German and American companies that built this vast corporate manufacturing entity under the Antarctic ice, they were challenged by an unknown space program. And as far as anyone knows, this program is connected to the Russians. So this is the Russian space program. That Vladimir Putin, he's been working with another group, other groups, and has been able to develop a program that rivals what has been developed in Antarctica. So the Russians have been very busy and being helped by their friends in developing their space program. So apparently this battle occurred and it reached a stalemate, and these very large ships carrying global elite had to return down to Antarctica. Apparently the global elite were wanting to leave Antarctica very quickly because there was some disaster that was happening. According to Corey, this might be the solar flash event or some kind of catastrophic series of events related to the sun, related to a pole shift even. So these people wanted to escape. Now we get to this period just before the 2016 presidential elections. You have John Kerry going to Antarctica just a couple of days before the presidential election. Anyone want to guess why he was down there going down to Antarctica? He wanted to see the penguins, right? Yeah, exactly. Those mating penguins, boy, something to see. Well, he went down there for a reason. I think one of the reasons was he had to explain to the Fourth Reich. The Fourth Reich believed, as a lot of people believed, that America is the best democracy money could buy, right? So the Fourth Reich had bought America. It's like, the election's not turning out the way we wanted. What's going on? He had to explain, well, it doesn't always work out. Sometimes the people actually speak, and we couldn't rig this one. So he had to explain what happened. And so the Fourth Reich was very unhappy with that. And then, of course, this happens. The Fourth Reich didn't think that he would be elected, that this was a wild card. They knew all about the Democrats and Hillary Clinton, but this guy was new. He had a very different way of doing things. So someone that's kind of independent, a bit of a rogue, not easily controlled. They don't have a control file on him that they can discredit him. Trump's control file was thrown at him during the election. Hillary Clinton had it all given to her to kind of like make sure he didn't win. So the control file on Trump was already exposed. All the dirt on Trump was already exposed. So now they can't control him. So he says what he wants to say, and that's it. No one can control him. That's, John Kelly, I think his chief of staff, has therapy sessions. Maybe someone from here. How do you control this guy, Trump? But anyway, that's what happens. So in his inauguration speech, Trump said some pretty meaningful things. He said, "We stand at the birth of a new millennium, ready to unlock the mysteries of space, to free the Earth from the miseries of disease, and to harness the energies, industries, and technology of tomorrow." Okay, wow, that's quite a mouthful. What in the world does he mean by that? What does he know? Well, actually, he knows quite a bit, because his uncle, John Trump, was who? Does anyone know? Sorry?
He got all the Tesla technology.
Exactly. John Trump was a professor of electrical engineering at MIT, and he was given the FBI asked Trump to help them work on Tesla's papers that had been retrieved after Tesla's death. So they were trying to work out how advanced were these patent applications or these drafts that Tesla was working on. So John Trump was the man that was the point man for this. So John Trump knew about the US Navy and the US Army's efforts to kind of like understand advanced technology projects. And during the war, he was actually in Britain as well, overseeing some of the kind of advanced technology programs. And so Trump says that when he was kind of an undergraduate, that he actually was told by his uncle all of this stuff about advanced technologies. So Trump knows a lot of stuff. He's no fool. He knows a lot of things. And one of the first things he did, and this is something that's very interesting if it can be confirmed, it was said that he issued a secret presidential memorandum to declassify anti-aging and free energy technologies. There are, and this is a fact, that there's 5,700 patent applications that are held up in the US Trademarks Office, and these are held up under national security orders. According to information Corey Good got, soon after Trump was elected, he issued this memorandum saying that 1,000 of these patent applications that mainly dealt with anti-aging and free energy have to be released. Or they have to let these patents go forward so that they can be granted, and then technologies to actually reverse aging can become part of the mainstream community. It'll be expensive, but yeah, you can take your anti-aging pills and reverse 10 years, and you pay, a few $100,000 or whatever for your bottle of anti-aging pills. But this is what we can imagine happening as the corporations start to have these patents come forward and to develop these kinds of technologies. Newt Gingrich was sent to Antarctica as Trump's emissary to the Fourth Reich. So they sent John Kerry down there just before the election with the bad news that Trump's going to win, and we can't stop that. And now Trump sends his emissary down there, Newt Gingrich. And what was Newt Gingrich doing down there? Yeah, right, look at that. Whoa, yeah, okay, that's what he was doing, right? Okay, that's the official story. He went there with Callista, but he was there Trump's all about, let's do a deal, right? Let's make a deal. So Trump was sending Gingrich down there to find out, fill out these Germans and the Fourth Reich. What do they want? What makes them tick? What kind of deals can we reach with them? So this was the first outreach by the Trump administration. So you want to know why the deep state was spying on the Trump administration? It's like they're trying to get, they're not just trying to find new dirt on Trump. They're trying to find out who's he been talking to, right? What's really going on? So now, of course, we all know Newt Gingrich, but his wife, Callista Gingrich, very good. Okay, deals are being made. It involves the Vatican, and how better to make a deal with the Fourth Reich than to actually work with the Vatican that has been working with the Fourth Reich since the Second World War, right? So Callista is the US ambassador to the Vatican. So this kind of gives us an idea of how deep all this goes. So now, how do we see all of this playing out? What's going to be happening now? Here we are, 2018. The deep state is being dismantled or being challenged by Trump and the people behind him. So overcoming the deep state is the key to global transformation. Okay, the deep state works with the Fourth Reich. They're hand in glove. So this is the question. Okay, so a lot of people assume that Trump is just this maverick and this kind of buffoon that accidentally got elected to the White House. Well, who's really behind Donald Trump?
Military.
The military. Okay, good. So for those that really question what's going on with Trump, I think this photo tells it all. This photo was taken on the very night following the FBI raid on Trump's attorney, Michael Cohen. So Cohen, Trump's personal attorney, gets raided by the FBI after the Mueller investigation says, go in there. So the deep state is trying to get whatever dirt they can find on Trump to try and have him impeached. So they actually authorized this raid on his personal attorney. Never happened before in US history that the personal attorney of a US president is raided while the guy's still in office. So, okay, so the deep state is trying to take Trump out. And so they're getting, you know, obviously I think Trump's worried about this. So that very evening, you have this. These guys show up at the White House in the Oval Office, and they get photographed, and it's very interesting. How many are on Trump's right here? How many uniformed officers are on his Trump? How many? 9, and how many on the left? 11. 9, 11. What message are you sending there? Okay. You're sending the message. We have the goods on you. We have the goods on you, the deep state, because we know you were behind 9/11. And what does that mean? Under the authorization for the use of military force that was passed by Congress on September 14, that puts the US in a state of war against all of those aiding and abetting the attackers, all those aiding and abetting those behind 9/11. So they're sending a message saying, we know who was behind 9/11, and it wasn't a bunch of goons in some caves in Afghanistan. It was you guys. We know it was you, okay? So they got the goods. So they're moving against them. So Trump signs an executive order in December 21, says that I, Donald Trump, President of the United States of America, determine that serious human rights abuse and corruption around the world constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States, and I hereby declare a national emergency to deal with that threat. So basically here you have December 21, 2017, Trump saying that the United States is in a state of emergency, national emergency, because of international human rights abuse and corruption happening all over the world. So this, when you put this presidential or executive order and put that alongside the authorization for military force from 2001, what you have is legal mechanisms that Trump can use to start detaining people for either having aided and abetted 9/11 or being involved in international human rights or corruption. And so that's where we get to the whole thing with the sealed indictments. 50,000 sealed indictments, or 50,000 sealed cases. I mean, there's a difference between a sealed case and a sealed indictment. That has been confirmed that there are 50,000 sealed cases. And normally in any one calendar year, there's about 1,000. So something extraordinary is happening. Now, how many of those 50,000 sealed cases are indictments? We don't know, but we could guess that based on the information that's coming from QAnon, or Q, that a lot of these, the vast majority of these are secret indictments of the deep state based on them being involved in 9/11 or in international human rights or corruption anywhere around the planet. So there is a process unfolding. John Huber is the U.S. Attorney for the state of Utah, and he was authorized by Attorney General Jeff Sessions in June of 2017 to begin investigating all of the complaints that had been forwarded to Jeff Sessions by the House Intelligence Committee and the House Judiciary Committee. So all of the complaints related to kind of abuses and corruption, these are things that are now being investigated by this special attorney who has other attorneys, US attorneys working with him that have been authorised by Jeff Sessions. And also there are 470 investigators that are part of the Office of the Inspector General under Michael Horowitz, who's the Inspector General, that are helping John Huber investigate all of these complaints. So that is a fact. And that tells us what may be happening all behind the scenes. And all of this is about to blow over. And of course, one of the things that came up during the hearings on Brett Kavanaugh, and I have a couple of articles on there on exopolitics.org where I'll talk about what Kavanaugh said in an exchange with Lindsey Graham, which was very important. Basically, what he said was that US citizens can be tried by military courts in a time of war, and because of the authorization for military force, we are still at a time of war. And anyone that is collaborating with the enemy can be viewed as an enemy combatant. And so those people, those deep state figures that are involved in the 9/11 attacks or associated with the kind of funding of the terrorist organisations behind 9/11 can all be regarded as colluding with the enemy or even enemy combatants. So so in this back and forth between Lindsey Graham and Brett Kavanaugh, Kavanaugh was saying, yes, that's exactly the case, that military trials can be used against US citizens and that this is entirely legal. So he was basically giving us a hint of what lies ahead. So, what's going on now in Antarctica? Well, there have been secret negotiations in Patagonia, secret negotiations with the Germans down there, because we are getting close to everything being revealed, and so the deals are being made. And the Trump administration is behind those. So he sent his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, down to San Carlos de Bariloche on February 3rd, 2018. So this was after Gingrich went down there. So then a month later, you have Tillerson going down there, who's the Secretary of State. Mike Pompeo is now the Secretary of State, but Tillerson went down there and negotiated on behalf of the Trump administration with the Fourth Reich down there at San Carlos de Bariloche, which is adjacent to Antarctica, and there are actually cavern systems all the way going from San Carlos de Bariloche down to Antarctica. So you can have the Fourth Reich easily coming up, going to Patagonia to meet with the representatives, and also Jeff Bezos was visiting Patagonia on February 3rd, and he's working with the Chinese space program. So there, Bezos is also part of the negotiations, and he's there and also representing the interests of the Chinese. So you have some of the major players all down there in Bariloche to negotiate how to move forward as everything is revealed to the world. And this was information, this is publicly available. It's kind of like circumstantial evidence, but we had a few people talking about it. One was Ben Fulford, and I know he's a controversial figure, but still I thought what he had to say here was very interesting because he does have real sources. There's no doubt about it. How, sorting out the wheat from the chaff can be difficult with Ben Fulford, but he does have genuine sources. So this is the information he got, and it kind of is very consistent with what I was able to learn from my sources. And it's that a major peace deal was reached last week in negotiations that took place literally under the light of the blue blood supermoon in a certain Asian country last week, according to sources who were present. As a result of this, the Nazi faction of the world military-industrial complex has agreed to align itself with the light side of the Force. Thus, in the near future, Nazi technology, notably anti-gravity and hypersonic Mark 20 air travel, will be made available to the surface population of the planet, the sources say. So this is something I discuss in this article, so you can find it online. But this is what we are very likely going to hear very soon. is that we're going to learn that the Germans did successfully set up a program in Antarctica, but rather than being Nazis, ardent Nazis, that these were actually German nationalists that had separated from the Third Reich, and that they had gone an independent way, and that they are now helping the rest of the planet kind of raise consciousness, and they can actually make a good case because their people were involved in the contactee movement in the 1950s. Maria Orsic and the Vril Society, that was coming out of Antarctica, because Antarctica wasn't just a dark program. It was also, it had a very light program where you had these Germans, Maria Orsic and her people, that were wanting to raise consciousness, wanting to introduce space philosophy, and to kind of like introduce humanity to its true history, that we are kind of literally descended or genetically connected to multiple extraterrestrial civilizations. So this is information that we are likely to be exposed to soon. And disclosure is happening. People are being prepared for this. So now scientists are now talking about life below the Antarctic ice sheet survives on ancient forests deep under the ice, so a couple of miles under the ice sheets. You can have life down there because there's kind of sources of heat coming from the volcanoes that is creating an ecosystem that can make life habitable down there for different life forms. They confirm that there are these vast cavern systems under the Antarctic ice. So this is again recently been confirmed by the scientific community that these cavern systems exist, and that life is capable of being hosted down there. And that's because of the vast collection of volcanoes under the Antarctic ice. You can see that these are concentrated in the West Antarctic region. All of these volcanoes have been recently discovered. In 2017, it was announced that 91 volcanoes were discovered in Antarctica, in the western regions. Previously, they'd found 40 of them because, like Mount Erebus, they protrude above the ice sheet. But these 91 volcanoes were all under the ice, but using kind of thermal imagery and radar penetrating imagery, they were able to find these additional 91 volcanoes, and some of them are becoming very active. So what lies ahead for Antarctica? Okay, so what can we expect in the next 5 years, given everything that I've said? Well, one of the things we need to consider here is that West Antarctica is being heated. Okay, and this is a NASA study, a 5-decade-long study that showed West Antarctica is heating relative to East Antarctica. So if it was just global warming due to carbon dioxide, you can imagine the heating would be kind of concentrated on the coastal regions around the entire Antarctic continent. But it's not. It's concentrated mainly on West Antarctica and including the interior. So why is that the case? Okay, good. So the inner core of the Earth is being heated up. The volcanoes are being being activated because they obviously generating their outlets for all of this inner Earth energy to come forward. They're being stimulated, and it's melting off the ice. So you've got cosmic energy coming in to the Earth, coming into our solar system as the entire solar system moves to a region of space with higher concentrations of cosmic energy. And the scientific community has confirmed that this is what is being observed. This is where we get to the kind of like, okay, well, what could happen if the West Antarctic ice sheet melts? What would happen? Well, this is where we need to start thinking about research of people like Charles Hapgood, who was the author of The Path of the Pole. And Albert Einstein wrote the foreword. So Einstein thought that this was actually a very accurate theory. So this is one of the things that really is worth considering, is what Einstein had to say about what triggers a pole shift. And he said, quote, "In a polar region there is continual deposition of ice which is not symmetrically distributed about the pole. The Earth's rotation acts on these unsymmetrically deposited masses and produces centrifugal momentum that is transmitted to the rigid crust of the Earth. The constantly increasing centrifugal momentum produced in this way will, when it has reached a certain point, produce a movement of the Earth's crust over the rest of the Earth's body, and this will displace the polar regions towards the equator." So what does that mean? We go back to here. You can see the ice sheet is melting in West Antarctica. So the asymmetrical distribution of the ice in Antarctica is rising because more of the ice is melting in West Antarctica, and East Antarctica, the ice is remaining. So as this melts, the asymmetrical weight distribution of the ice in Antarctica increases, which interacts with the centrifugal forces of the Earth, which is going to result in this, a pole shift. That's what Einstein said happens according to Hapgood's theory. So according to, this is how the Earth looked 13,000 years ago. Antarctica was ice-free and probably was Atlantis. That's another story, but I'll talk about that tomorrow, Antarctica being Atlantis. So Antarctica was in open ocean, and the North Pole was basically concentrated in North America 13,000 years ago. So you have a pole shift that occurred back then. So could it occur again? Possibility. According to another theorist, Emmanuel Velikovsky, he says that the Earth's rotation has shifted. So this pole shift might be actually accompanied by a reverse in the spinning of the Earth's surface. Velikovsky found historical quotes saying that this had happened in the past. Herodotus, talking to Egyptian priests, 4 times in this period, so they told me the sun rose contrary to his wont. Twice he rose where he now sets, and twice he sets where he now rises. So there were times where the sun would rise in the west and set in the east. That is part of the ancient historical records that has been kept from us. Now, that kind of phenomenon may be a result of a pole shift. So this is one of the things that we have to consider, is that, well, is this what's going to happen? Could we face a pole shift like this that could result in all of the ice, as a result of all the ice melting, that there's a pole shift? Well, I think probably we might have a sequence of events that prior to a pole shift you have something like full disclosure. And what's interesting about Antarctica and full disclosure is that unlike us wanting the US military to disclose the truth about what's really happening at Area 51 or what's really happening at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base or at China Lake or wherever, in Antarctica, it's a process that the Earth herself controls, that Gaia, the planet, controls, because the ice sheets are melting, and as they melt, with so many satellites up there, everything in Antarctica is being observed. And so people are, they're looking over Google Earth maps of Antarctica trying to find artifacts, so people are looking. So, and this is what Emery Smith, who has his own sources that confirm a lot of this Antarctica information that I've been talking about. Emery Smith says that his sources say that it's exactly like that. Things are down there that have been discovered. So Emery Smith says earlier this year, quote, it won't be the people, it won't be us exposing this, it's going to be Earth that exposes it because of the warmth. They can't fight the heat right now. And since they can't fight the heat, it's going to be really hard to explain when some of the snow melts in the next year and this giant thing starts being exposed and different metals. So Gaia will be disclosure. Earth will be the one who discloses it, which is beautiful. So I think he's just talking about an organic process happening here where the Earth is going to expose what's buried under the Antarctic ice sheets. And that's going to give a lot of people a heads up on what's going on. And this takes me to QAnon, or Q. Just very recently, just the last week, I mean, this is, I think was this September 19, Q confirms that secret space programs are real and extraterrestrial life exists. So this is the first time that Q, who has written a lot about the deep state and how pervasive the corruption is in the political system, not only in the US but globally, and the different families involved in this, for the first time has talked about the Roswell crash, talked about the extraterrestrial crash, talked about the existence of extraterrestrial life. This happened in a Q&A session, and the interesting thing about that Q&A session with QAnon is that Q gets to choose what questions to answer. So the questions Q chooses to answer are very relevant because it basically feeds into the disclosure narrative or the disclosure agenda of Q and the White House. So by answering these questions and telling us that Roswell really did happen, that extraterrestrial life exists, and there are secret space programs, Q is telling us that disclosure, full disclosure, is on the Trump White House agenda. How cool is that? That's cool, yeah, that's really good. I mean, it's like, okay, there really is a disclosure agenda. And so, so this is what is happening. So I'm not going to go through all of this because, you know, I want to give you a bit of time, but I just want to leave it up there for you. So we have like, I don't know, how many 10 minutes of questions. So we have 10 minutes of questions. So I'll leave it up there for you in case you want to refer to it. But I just want to mention I have the book, Antarctica's Hidden History, that talks about everything I've talked about today is in there. You can find more details, references, and so forth. So with that, I now welcome questions, and feel free to refer to that. Let's begin over there first, and then we'll go to the lady in the middle.
Dr. Salla, sorry. Did you actually meet with Dr. Tompkins when he wrote Chosen by Extraterrestrials? Did you get a chance to meet with him?
I read his book after I had written my first secret space program book on Corey Goode. So that book came out in September of 2015,
right.
And then Bill Tompkins' book came out in December of 2015.
Yeah. Well, the reason I ask is I think in that book, if I remember correctly, back in 1938, 39, like you said, the Nazis were down in Antarctica. They had anti-gravity craft back then, and a lot of scientists and technicians that knew Hitler might be coming into power actually took off. Mm-hmm. Right? They did, and started, basically they're still out there in the outer cosmos exploring. Isn't that right? Because they discovered, discovered anti-gravity back in 38, 39, yeah. That's what Tompkins said.
Right, yeah. They're different groups of scientists. Some of them left with Guglielmo Marconi and went to South America, because Marconi got together, because the Italians also had a very big space program, but Marconi realized that a war was going to happen and that Mussolini was going to go join Hitler in a crazy war, so he decided to kind of fake his death and take as many scientists as he could with him down to South America and build a civilian and peaceful space program using all of this anti-gravity technology. Right, and some of the Germans that were also involved in these anti-gravity projects actually immigrated to the United States before the Second World War. So Wolfgang Klemperer, that I mentioned earlier, that helped the Navy, that helped build the first Navy dirigibles, that he was actually very familiar with these anti-gravity technologies.
How many times have you been to Antarctica?
I haven't been to Antarctica. Corey Good has been twice.
Why haven't you been?
I'm a researcher, so
You gotta go, why don't you go right to the source of the
Penguins didn't invite.
to get to see what's going on. I mean, there's Emery Smith actually is organising an expedition to Antarctica. He's organising an expedition to go down to Antarctica in 2019. It costs a lot of money, and also you need to get permission to be able to tour any facilities down there. It's not an easy thing. And to see the classified programs under the ice, you have to have need to know. And we as private citizens don't have need to know access. But there are two people who say they have been, and they did have need to know access, and that's Corey Good and Pete Peterson. So, and they've shared what they say they saw.
But if that's all ice, how did the Germans even, you can't build if you're in miles and tens of thousands of miles of ice. How did Germans even build anything down there? Where's their electricity coming from back in the 40s? Realistically, how did they even build anything?
Okay, all right. Well, let me answer that and then move to someone else. This was actually, this was something the Germans had pioneered in occupied Europe. They became specialists once the Allied bombing raids started emerging, and everything on the surface, all the German factories began to be bombed. They built these underground facilities in Germany itself, in different mountain complexes like the Harz Mountains. That's where they built Nordhausen, a huge facility where they were building V1 and V2 rockets, all under the ground. People didn't know it could be done. They built electricity production plants there under the mountains or adjacent to it, so that they could power these things.
You had the caverns underneath that were heated 75 degrees. So underneath 1 or 2 miles of ice, there were these warm caves that they could
1 or 2
build.
miles under, how'd they even dig to get up through ice that been back in the 60s?
Because of their extraterrestrial contacts, they got information about the inner topography of Antarctica.
Mm-hmm. So they were able to use submarines to get under there. We have a gentleman up the back.
I'd like to bring something up that you didn't talk about that may be dearer to your heart now, which is the location of the geothermic plant next to Kilauea, and the supposed story that the purpose was to create tsunamis that would destroy the West Coast, the Asian coast, and all the rest. What's your take on that?
Okay, well, very quickly, the deep state, a global organization that thrives on creating chaos and destruction, and their means of staying in power is to create new wars or new global catastrophes. And so they were using this geothermal plant, which is owned by an Israeli company that is connected to the Rothschild family, to basically trigger these earthquakes to not only create a lava flow that would kind of like change the geology down there on the Big Island, but also generate a sufficiently large earthquake so that part of the Helena slump would collapse, that would generate a mega tsunami. And so you would have a 100-foot tidal wave hitting the west coast of the United States, destroying the entire coastline, which would basically wipe out the Navy and cripple the US military. Because the US military at the moment is the deep state's biggest enemy. In addition to Russia and China, not so much, because the deep state's moving into China. But Russia and the US military are the principal foes of the deep state. And so they were using this geothermal plant in Hawaii to kind of like really weaken the US military. At the very back with the...
Dr. Salla, just wanted to ask you, I'd read a little bit about the covert colonization of our solar system. Was just curious, your thoughts regards to the piece I'd read about was a German base on the dark side of the moon, and also additional bases. I'm not sure who they're supposed to belong to, but additional bases on Mars. If you had any either information on that or speculation?
Right, yes. So when the Germans first arrived on the moon has many different extraterrestrial civilizations with bases up there. So the moon is like Antarctica. You can't go up there and militarize and so forth. But the Germans were invited there by a group of extraterrestrials called the reptilians or the draconians. And so the Germans were able to build a base there on the moon. And over the years, once agreements were reached with the US military-industrial complex, that base has been expanded and it's gone deeper and deeper. And now it's called the Lunar Operations Command. And it has three levels. Yeah, original shape was like a swastika, but it's been built up. And so that's on the moon. You have that Lunar Operations Command. And on Mars, different bases were built over the years, especially in the northern and southern hemispheres, which seemed to be more hospitable for underground bases because they didn't have, they weren't places that could be disrupted by these enormous magnetic storms or electrical storms that Mars has very often. Okay.
Yes, I'm curious. When you were talking about anti-gravity technology earlier, do you think anti-gravity technology was used to build the huge monolithic structures of the ancient world, like the pyramids and the Baalbek temple? And do you think that, because how would they move those big blocks? I mean, do you think there was anti-gravity type technology?
I think it's resonant frequency. In other words, they have a way now to basically identify the specific energy signature of any object. Even our body, our internal organs have specific energy signatures, and so they do have technologies for this, so that if you want to take out a person, like whether induce a heart attack or have their thyroid go out or something, there are technologies which emit a particular frequency that might be specific to that person, and that organ can go out. Or if you want a rock to move, you know the energy signature, specific energy signature of that rock, and once you activate that technology, that rock can start to float.
Those rocks that they moved, they were cut specifically for the area that they were sitting in, like the ones in South America. They look like jigsaw puzzles. Do you think they maybe have changed their state of matter before they set the rock in there and then changed it back to its original state of matter?
Well, I think the thing is that their technology understood resonant frequencies, that they used frequencies and understood how they operated, not only for generating anti-gravity effects, but also for construction purposes. So could they have used that to alter the shape of a particular rock? It's quite possible they did that. I mean, the kind of similar idea is in microwave technologies that they use for creating some crop circles. Not all crop circles are created by satellites with microwave technologies, but some are. So they know how to emit an energy or particular microwave frequency so that you can actually alter the shape of an object.
Okay.
Let's see, the gentleman anyone that hasn't asked the question yet?
My question is, with the possible disclosure, if free energy technology would be, allowed to the public to have knowledge about it?
I believe so. I think that the White Hats and the Earth Alliance, whatever names you want to give them, I think they understand the big picture. That it's not just about let's do the right thing and reveal the truth. We have to prepare for a very serious possibility that there can be one, a solar flash that takes out the electrical grid of the planet. Two, there can be a pole shift that can basically physically lead to destruction in large areas of the planet. So we have to get ready, and the way to do that is to release these technologies so that people can have independent sources of power. If people need to leave the planet, we can. That these technologies have to be released quickly, and I think that there are enough good people in the system now that realise that this is a necessity and that this is something that has to be done very, very quickly.
Thank you.
And yeah.
Doctor, I forgot to ask you, you brought up a good point with Maria when she was, thank you, with the Vril women. She's part of Vril Society. She was in communication, I think, with the Pleiadians, right?
Aldebaran. Yeah.
Right, Aldebaran, the constellation Taurus, right? So, a lot of that information she got to build the Han and Bron, the anti-gravity craft, was from the good ETs. The good ETs, right?
They're recording.
Okay, I'm sorry, the good ETs. Now, in 1952, when they had the German fly over D.C., and Eisenhower met with the Fourth Reich, and also he met with who? The Greys, right? And the Draconians. So how do we go from the Pleiadians way back in the 40s, the good guys, so to speak, the good ETs, to, you know...
Right, good question.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, well, Eisenhower in 1954, what was it, I think it was March 10 of 1954, he travelled to, it was late February 1954, he travelled to Edwards Air Force Base, and he had a meeting with human-looking extraterrestrials. Some of them had been helping the Germans, and they said, we want to share technologies with you, but first of all, you have to help us to help you in raising consciousness and developing a higher ethical system. And only until you've shown yourself to be mature enough will we allow you to have these these advanced technologies. So Eisenhower's national security advisors overruled him. They said, no, we want our nuclear weapons, we're attached to those. So they said no, and then the following year, another group of extraterrestrials came, and these were the Greys, and they're working with the reptilians and the Nazis, or the Germans out of Antarctica. They've been working with them, and they struck a deal. It was like, yeah, we'll give you advanced technologies, and you'll give us access to your people and so forth. So there was a kind of a deal that was struck, but that was with a different group of extraterrestrials.
That was mostly, I guess, the trade-off was we allowed them to experiment on human beings and genetic experiments, the Greys, that is, to perpetuate their race. Was that the deal we struck back then?
They wanted raw resources, access to our genetics.
Yeah.
And from our side, especially from the Air Force side, they wanted to get advanced technologies from this extraterrestrial German alliance, but they were fooled. They were lied to.
They were lied to. Yeah, they were. Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Hi, Doctor. In your book, you have a thing about the Vril force for psychic purposes in spaceflight. Maria Orsic was deeply dedicated to promoting greater awareness of humanity's latent spiritual potential and cosmic connection. Could you elaborate on the Vril force?
Okay, the Vril force was something that occultists from around the world recognized as we might call it chi, we might call it prana. It's like the force in the Star Wars series, but occultists in the 1870s began to talk about the Vril force as something that could be utilized by a person who evolved consciously sufficiently, so it could be utilized for use as a weapon, to defend yourself. It could be used for controlling advanced technologies. Edward Bulwer Lytton wrote a book called Vril, The Coming Race. And in that book that came out in 1870, he was, I think, with the Rosicrucian Society, that was accepted by occultists as the truth worldwide, which is why the German occultists that set up shop in Antarctica the Vril Society, you know, there were many occultists in Britain, the United States, France, that wanted to work together because they understood the Vril force was real, and that once you evolve through higher consciousness to a certain degree, you're able to use this thing for great good or negative for. I mean, Hitler was trying to use it, but he never really
They talked about like strengthening your will. Is that like through like concentration exercises? Like I'm trying to understand that a little bit better.
Okay, well, the Vril force is like being able to stop the mind from wandering and being able to totally focus on the present moment.
Meditation.
It's like it's a force. You kind of get into the present moment and allow it to flow through you.
Thank you.
One more question.
So one more.
If I was going to put an origin story, a point for your talk today, would it be a crash of a UFO in the Black Forest in the 1920s, early 30s, and then it was reverse engineered by the Germans, and then that whole German takeoff for much of your talk today comes from a UFO orientation, and then you didn't speak that much until the end about the actual UFOs. When you go down to like the Dogon tribes and the Pleiades, I just wanted you to close with maybe a few words of where these extraterrestrials, rather than interplanetary, are coming from, Pleiades or other places.
Okay. Well, there's as many as 60 different extraterrestrial civilizations that are interacting with us now. And we are a product of 22 different genetic long-term experiments that go back hundreds of thousands of years. So, you know, we are hybrid extraterrestrials. Everyone in this room, our bodies are a hybrid compilation of all of these different extraterrestrial races. So, you know, they're very interested in us, but we are genetically kind of connected with them. So some of them are here to help us because we're genetically cousins, so they give us advanced technologies or ideas for new energy. People like Nikola Tesla was probably an extraterrestrial himself. And others are here because, you know, our genetics are so suitable, they want to exploit us, so we're a resource. So you have the good and the bad. Okay. Thank you.